Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 4 lecture. Hope you're all doing well. All right, so this chapter is pretty straightforward. It talks about a topic called tissues. Now, if I were to ask you, and I think I did ask this at some point, how many tissues do you think there are in the body? So maybe you can ask somebody, in your household or someone just to see what they say. And people will come up with really large answers, when in fact, in the human body, there are only 4 major types of tissue. So let's first go back and just define a couple terms. First of all, what is a tissue? And then how do we study it? Okay, or what is that field of study, the study of tissues? So here we go. Tissue is a group of similar cells with a common function. Okay, so the cells are very similar. They all do some kind of function that has a common end, and we'll see the different types. And then the study of tissues is actually called histology. And you can take, a whole class in college of histology, a whole semester or a whole quarter of a lot of looking under the microscope, because a lot of this is microscopic. Okay, so you won't really, you see tissues, but to really be able to identify them and categorize them, you have to be able to look at their microscopic makeup kind of thing, their structure. All right, so let's take a look. What are these 4 types? And I have mentioned this before, but I'm going to do it again. And I will have a picture that comes with this. All right. All right, so the first type is epithelial tissue, lines body surfaces and internal organs. So the term epi means above or on top of. So we talked about epigastric, right? Gastric means stomach, epi means above or on top of. So this is about understanding, okay? Because in board exams and in your profession, you're going to come across a lot of terms that you may have never heard about. And so understanding the terminology is really important. I think I mentioned, you're going to take, or you have taken a medical terminology class. Really, really pay attention and really work hard. It's going to save you so much, having to look up information or just getting a sense of what system it's in the body. All right, so epithelial tissue, epi, it's something on top. And of course, this is lining surfaces. So anywhere there's a surface, you're going to have an epithelial tissue along that. And so also, once you know that, where you find it, what kind of tissue do you think it would look like? What are the cells like? What are their shapes? How many layers are there, right? What's its function? So since it's on the outside of things, it's mainly protective, okay? The second type is connective tissue, and just like the name, it connects things. It binds, it supports, it's kind of the body's glue. It holds the body together. The next type is muscle tissue, attached to bones, cause movements. Muscle tissues contract. Oh. So they contract and shorten. We'll talk more in detail when we get to the muscular system about its, microscopic components and things like that. But essentially, they shorten. But since they're attached to things, they cause movement. Nervous tissue, they conduct electrical impulses. I'll put that. For communication and regulation of the body. And we will spend some time on the nervous system and how they work, how, that nervous tissue does that, how it communicates with the rest of the body. It's one of the main regulatory mechanisms or systems in our body that helps us to communicate, from the tips of our toes to our brain, right? We have to have some form of communication. So we know what our body is doing. So here's just some examples, a nice little diagram here. Okay, brain, of course, is nervous tissue made up of a couple types of cells, neurons and glial cells, and we'll talk more about that. Glial are support cells. Epithelial tissue, we'll talk about that next. Muscle tissue and connective tissue. All right. So let's take a look. Let's take a look with the first one, epithelial tissue. Okay, and we're just going to make our way through the different types of tissues. So epithelial tissue, remember, are tissues that line the body surfaces and cavities. All right. And let's take a look at how we classify. Okay, so we need a way to talk about the different types of epithelial tissues, okay? Because there are a lot of different epithelial tissues in the body, okay? So many different organs and cavities and passageways. So it can't all be the same, right? It's got to be different depending on where it's located and its function. So, and that would be the case. So there are two ways that we can classify tissues. In other words, how do we talk about it and how do we categorize it? The first way, I'll make this picture a little bigger. Okay, so the first way is by the shape of the cells. What is the shape? That's all. The second way is how many layers. The more layers, the more protective it is. The less layers, maybe there's something else we wanted to happen there. Maybe not so much protection, but although it always has a kind of protective function, but maybe we need to have things pass through it. So a big, thick epithelium wouldn't make sense. All right, and so that's what we're going to talk about now. Oh, well, here, the types of shapes. So there are squamous cells, which are flat, cuboidal cells, which are cubed, and columnar cells, which are like a column. All right, let me see. Let me get a little picture of. Okay. Okay, let me give you a nice picture so you can get an idea of what that looks like. Oops. All right, so in general, this is an epithelial tissue here. Okay, so an epithelium is a noun, right? So the tissue is called epithelium. But we use the term epithelial tissue, which is a description of the tissue, right? Epithelial is descriptive, and epithelium is like a noun. All right, so kind of in our bodies, we'll have epithelia or epithelial tissue all over our body, right? Everywhere there's a surface. But know that underlying it is what we call a basement membrane. You think of the basement or the base of something is at the bottom, right? So at the bottom of the epithelium, there's always a membrane here that is I shouldn't say always because there's some tissues that don't have the basement membrane, but it's more of an exception. So there's a basement membrane kind of at the transition between the underlying connective tissue and the epithelium. So connective tissue, we haven't gotten there yet, but I'm going to talk about it really briefly, connects the other tissues together, right? So we need a way to connect the epithelium with underlying things and other structures, right? Because otherwise that epithelium might just slough off really easily or scrape off or just float away, all right? So we have to have some means of tying it to underlying connective tissue, and that is their basement membrane. So we can have cells that are flat. See, some of these are flat. Some of these are cubed, all right? And this would be a columnar cell. So these are the different types of shapes that the cells can have. The other thing is how many layers, and we can look at a tissue like under the microscope and look to see how many layers is it. If it is one layer, we call it a simple epithelium. If it is more than one layer, we call it stratified. If it looks like it's many layers, oops, it is one layer but looks stratified. If it looks like it has many layers, but in reality it's only one layer, we call it pseudo-stratified, meaning fake. Pseudo means fake, fake stratified. Okay, it's only one layer. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the different types of connective tissue. Okay, so now that we know kind of generalized characteristics of epithelium and how to characterize them, let's now talk about the different types. All right, and there are more than this, but I'm going to just, let me make this littler so we can fit all these things into one page. Okay, so the first type is called a simple squamous epithelium, right? So you can see how I'm using those characteristics and now making a type of epithelium. So simple squamous, okay, just break it up. Simple means one layer, squamous means flat. So we're looking at a single layer of flat cells, a single layer of flat cells. So you may think about, where would I find that and what would it look like? I'll draw them in just a second. So because it's flat, we would expect it to see in the lungs, the air sac, okay, where we want lots of exchange of gases to be easy. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged with the blood, and so we would expect a very thin epithelium. Simple cuboidal glands, simple columnar, we find within the digestive system. Okay, a single layer of column-like cells here, or simple cuboidal is a single layer of cubed cells. We have stratified squamous, many layers of flat cells. Okay, stratified squamous. We also have pseudostratified columnar. Pseudostratified columnar we find in a lot of the respiratory system. Okay, so remember that one looks like it's many layers, but it really is only one layer, pseudostratified. And then the last type is kind of a unique type of epithelium that we don't see a lot in the body, but we do have it. It's called transitional. Transitional epithelium, it changes shape. It transitions from one shape to another because it's found in places maybe where we might have some stretch. So when it's not stretched, such as the urinary bladder, okay, when you've just emptied your bladder, all right, the cells have a certain shape. But as soon as it gets filled, it starts filling up, it stretches it and the shape of the cell changes. So we call that transitional, all right, and specifically in the urinary bladder. So let's take a peek and draw a little bit. Okay. So what would a simple, epithelium type, right? And then location, where we'd find it. Okay, so epithelium type, and then drawing. Okay, so the first one is simple squamous. We saw that it was in the lung. I'm going to call them alveoli. Those are the little lung sacs. All right, and so what would it look like? Simple squamous, a single layer of flat cells. We have simple cuboidal. All right, glands. I'm not going to write the location because I've already given you that. All right, so let's draw it. Simple, a single layer, but cubes. Okay. Simple columnar. Again, I gave you that already. Some of the digestive system. This is a single layer of columns. Another thing you might see with this is the term ciliated. Ciliated meaning they have hair-like projections. So some columnar are not ciliated, non-ciliated, and some are ciliated. All right, we have stratified squamous epithelium. So we have our flat cells here, but now we have multiple layers of flat cells. Okay, we can have 100 layers of flat cells. And on our skin surface, it varies from place to place because there are some places that the skin is thicker, right? And some places where it is thinner. So we'll have varying amounts of stratified squamous epithelium there. We have, oops, this is 4. We have pseudo. This is a little harder to draw. Stratified. Columnar. All right, so it might look maybe like it's many layers. All right, and so here's the basement membrane down here. So it looks like there's several layers, but in fact, each one of these cells has a link to the basement membrane. So it looks stratified, but it's only really one layer. And then the last one is that transitional, which I'm not going to draw. It stretches and it changes shape. All right, the next question, let's go back, is junctions. All right, so epithelial tissue is very, what we call, very cellular. Okay, and when I mean, oh, maybe do I have another picture? Let me see if I can bring this picture up. If it's the right one. Okay. The different types of epithelium. They show you simple type epithelium, meaning single layers, right? And where each is found. And remember, these are in your textbook. So, you can look at it in your textbook. And then I, of course, provide the images so you can put it in your study guide if you want. All right. And then here's stratified and where you might find it. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about the different types of junctions. So a junction is a place or a structure, actually it's a structure where cells come together. So because epithelium is so cellular, it's layers of cells, right? Lots of cells. How do we keep the cells from falling apart? We have to have connections between them that hold the cells together. All right, and so these are the 3 different types. There's one one type called a tight junction, and it's like a zipper. It's very tight, so materials can't fit between cells because we want it to be a layer that sometimes prevents things from passing through through it. And so we can't have things passing between the cells because, we have to protect inside and outside. So it's like a zipper, and it tightly joins cells together. Desmosomes. Desmosomes are like buttons. So a button on a piece of clothing is not going to prevent material or, things from going between the buttons, right? It's not like a zipper, it's a button. And let's say you have several buttons. Things can pass through it, but it holds the garment together in that place that the button is found. We find these in tissues that move a lot, right? So let's say the heart, the cells of the heart, since it's moving like this, we have to have like extra forces to keep it from coming apart. That's what the desmosomes are. Gap junctions, just as it sounds, it has a gap. It's got an opening or like a canal through which materials can easily pass between cells. Okay, it allows communication between the cells. And this is also helpful well, it's helpful in tissue that needs information passed between them quickly. So going back to the heart cells, the cardiac cells, not only do they move, but we need information to pass from one cell to another very rapidly in order for the heart to be able to contract in an orderly fashion, right? So the heart, the top part of the heart, we call the atria, the cardiac cells in those areas contract first and squeeze blood into the lower chambers called the ventricles. And then the ventricles contract together to squeeze blood out of the heart. But every cell has to be connected to be able to contract at the same time. I mean, imagine, hundreds of people trying to have them jump up at the same time. How hard would that be? That'd be really hard. So now we have all these cardiac cells that contract or act together at the same time, which is kind of an amazing feat if you just think about it. All right, so let me show you a picture of what these little guys look like, these junctions. All right, let me make it a little bigger. So here's a cell, and then here are neighboring cells. All right, and here's the surface of the cell. Right, and down here is the basement membrane that's going to connect it to underlying structures, the connective tissue. So let's start with the tight junction. So this is, oh, and I skipped one. So a tight junction is like a zipper, and it's gonna like zip all the way across between cells and keep materials from passing through. This another type, and I didn't put it in here just because didn't really talk about it too much in the textbook. Adhering junction, it's like a belt, but it too connects cells and kind of keeps things from passing through. Okay, so this is the belt. And what it is, this looks kind of weird like this, but how it works and all these junctions, how they work is proteins from both cells come out and connect them together. All right, so there are specialized proteins that come out and join the two cells together. So you have a bunch of proteins here that come together, but it forms a belt-like structure. Here are desmosomes here that are buttons. See how they don't go all the way across? They're like a little button here, but still the concept's the same. They have these proteins that reach across and join together. Then we have the gap junctions here, and there are little proteins that form channels that allow material to quickly pass from one cell to the next. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at some other structures. Kind of, within epithelial tissue too. And these are the glands. Remember, glands are made of simple cuboidal epithelium. So let's take a peek at different kinds of glands. We have first what we call the endocrine glands. So we'll spend a whole lecture on the endocrine system. These glands are kind of internal. Endo means within. So these are internal glands that don't have ducts or passageways to the outside world. So they're inside our body, but they still secrete. They make substances and they secrete these substances into the bloodstream. It's another form of communication between the body. And these substances that are produced and secreted are called hormones. And again, this is all you need to know for right now. We will spend a lecture on that. The other type of gland is an exocrine gland. Exo means outside. So these glands have a duct that secrete material to a surface, to the outside world. So let me just draw this really quickly. That will help you envision what this looks like. Okay. All right, so an endocrine it is a gland, and so I'm going to kind of draw it like this. And remember, it's a simple cuboidal type of setup, single layer of cubes, and it will secrete a substance, and then that substance will make its way into the bloodstream. And this is a hormone. Okay, so this is the hormone. Color. All right, so this inside here is a hormone. And then that hormone is deposited into the blood where it's going to do some kind of action. So this is a blood vessel. But see, there's no duct, okay? The other type is an exocrine gland. It is also simple cuboidal. Single layer of cubes. Okay, and it secretes its substance into the center here. So it makes its substance here, but now we have a duct. So see, we have a duct. And there is a surface here. Okay, some kind of epithelial surface. And then this substance makes its way out to a surface. All right, sweat glands, saliva, they all have ducts that allow them to secrete their substance onto a surface. All right, those are made up of epithelial tissue, simple cuboidal. All right, now let's move on to the next type of tissue, which is connective tissue. So connective tissue is one of the most diverse and abundant types of tissue in the body. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment. So this question is asking for different types of fibers found in connective tissue. So all tissue, well, I shouldn't say all tissue, but most tissue has several components, and maybe I'll come back up here and put that on here, although I'm not going to test you on it, and I'm not even sure if the textbook really talks about this, but I think it's important. So under tissues, sorry if you're writing this out. So tissues have two components. There is what we call, cells, plus something called extracellular matrix. All right. So in other words, in all tissue, there are cells, and then there's the stuff that cells make and surround the cells. Okay, that's extracellular. Extras on the outside, and it's outside the cell, right? And the cells make it. Now, extracellular matrix, on the other hand, is made up of what we call, well, fibers, which I was defining down there, the different types of fibers. Okay, protein fibers, and then something called ground substance. Ground substance is kind of the gel-like material that all this sits inside, right? So the cells make fibers, and then it makes this ground substance, this gel-like substance that it sits in. Now that gel can be different. It can be actually like gel, or it can be more solid, okay, or it can be fluid, right? So it varies what that ground substance is like. But so what I'm getting at down below is what are the different types of fibers in connective tissue? But we find these fibers in other tissues also, not so epithelial tissue too can have, but it's not a lot. Not a lot of ground substance, not a lot of extracellular matrix in epithelial tissue, but it's got a lot of cells. Okay, so now down here, we find a lot of cells within connective tissue. So that's why under connective tissue, we're going to look at the different types of fibers. Okay, so there are three. And the first one you probably have heard of, it's collagen fiber. Collagen, okay? We know it's like in our skin. People buy beauty products that have collagen in it. Well, these are the fibers that make up, let's say, your skin, or find in your skin. There's other types of fibers, elastic fibers and reticular fibers found in different parts of the body. Elastic are stretchy, okay, and reticular we find in particular places. I say lymphatic organs, the spleen is a lymphatic organ also, but the term reticular means network. And so reticular fibers form like a network like this of fibers. And so they call it reticular. Now remember that these terms are Latin and Greek. So reticular in Latin or Greek means network. All right, so that's where these terms come from. And if there's ever something that you just can't understand, look up its root word. What does it mean? What is something that you already know in your language that it will help you to remember? Another word that has that same root. Okay. So elastic arteries, we have some arteries that have to change diameter with pressure. So the ones close to the heart, as the heart is pushing blood out of these big vessels, they have to be able to accommodate that extra pressure, and they can be stretchy. All right, and then collagen fibers. Let's take a look at the different types of connective tissue. All right, and remember I said that it's very diverse in terms of its type. Maybe before I just list them, let me give you an idea. I'll draw it. All right, so let's take a look at just kind of an overview of connective tissue to give you an idea of how broad we're looking. So let's look at connective tissue. And I will abbreviate connective tissue as CT. Okay. So connective tissue can be divided up into several categories. The first one is called connective tissue proper. Okay. So I think of this as like when we think of connective tissue, what would come to mind? And this is what comes to mind. It's the things that connect things, all right? Things that we can see that actually has fibers running from one structure to another. The next type is called specialized connective tissue, or actually supportive. Well, let's do specialized. Let's do that again. Let's put it over here. Okay. So these are ones that we don't think of when we think of connective tissue. All right. Now, connective tissue proper can be divided up into two categories. The first one is called loose connective tissue, and it's named for what it looks like. Kind of think of the fibers, the collagen fibers, elastic fibers. What do they look like? If they're all loose, then it's a loose connective tissue. On the other hand, if it is dense, we call it dense connective tissue. Dense meaning there's a lot of collagen fibers that are tightly packed together. There are three types of loose connective tissue. The first one's called areolar connective tissue. It's the most abundant type of connective. Well, I don't know if it's most abundant, but it's everywhere. I guess that would make it abundant. This is the packing material in your body. So it is actually everywhere, almost everywhere, connecting things together. So around all your nerves and all your blood vessels, and nerves and blood vessels go everywhere. Okay. We have adipose tissue. This is fat. I'm going to say packing material. I'm getting into this one. And then the last one is called reticular connective tissue. Okay, so this one is in lymphatic organs, like lymph nodes, spleen. Okay, so it just has that kind of networky kind of look. Dense connective tissue, there are three types. We have dense regular. Dense regular are tendons and ligaments. Okay, lots of collagen fibers tightly packed together. We have dense irregular. Okay, lots of fibers again, but less tightly packed. Okay. This can be in, I want to say, the coverings of bones called periosteum. We could say skin, in the deep skin. And then the last one's called elastic connective tissue. Okay, so it's places where, it's a little more stretchy. So then we have specialized connective tissue. Specialized connective tissue can be divided up into supportive and fluid. Supportive can be cartilage and bone. So bone and cartilage are connective tissue, but they're more solid, right? Cartilage is less solid, but bone is solid. And then fluid would be blood. These are all connective tissue. Okay, so just want you to understand and see the diversity of connective tissue. All right, let me go ahead and put it now on our study guide. Okay, so the different types, I'm going to put them. All right, loose connective tissue, packing material, fat, lymphatic organs, dense connective tissue. Let me put dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. Tendons and ligaments are an example. All right. Other places, right? The deep skin. And then specialized cartilage, bone, blood. Okay. Let's take a look at the different types of cartilage and bone. So let's go back to my drawing here, and I'm going to add those on now. So cartilage, there are 3 different types of cartilage. Okay. We have cartilage. There is hyaline, which is the most abundant. Lots of places on our abundant. All right, most abundant in our body. It's at the ends of bones. When we're developing, all our bones are actually start out as hyaline cartilage, and then from the cartilage we make bone. But hyaline, there is fibrocartilage, which is found in the intervertebral discs. Right, so the little pads between our vertebrae, people have herniated discs and problems with their disc. That is fibrocartilage. And then lastly, there's elastic cartilage. All right, elastic cartilage would be, when I say vocal cords are elastic cartilage, our ears, our ears, elastic cartilage. Okay, and then bone, there's 2 types of bone. There's spongy bone, and then there's compact bone. And we will learn about this in the skeletal system. All right, and then blood, we'll spend time on blood also. Okay, let's go back. I'm going to put these on now. Let me give you another picture here before we get to the cartilage. Sorry. All right. Different types of cartilage, where they're found. Okay. So, take a look in your textbook, all the different types, what they kind of look like, because it would be nice to see what they look like, and not just, learn about what they are, but what do they actually look like. All right. So different types of cartilage, which I've listed, and then here's a little diagram. Oh, elastic cartilage. All right. Okay, let's take a look at the different types of muscles. So now we're leaving connective tissue, just to get a sense of its magnitude. Lots of different types. It's so diverse. Okay, different types of muscles. Now we will be spending a lot more time on muscles. So this is just an intro, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. There's 3 different types of muscles in the body. There's a smooth muscle that is found in the wall of organs. The important thing here is that it's involuntary. We don't control it. Okay. It just, the body will, this muscle will contract when needed. Okay, so think of, our hollow organs, our stomach, our small intestines, our urinary bladder, for females, their uterus, right? It's got all this smooth muscle around it. And when needed, it will contract and squeeze, food along. It will squeeze urine out. It will squeeze a baby when it's time to give birth. All right. So these are things we don't say, okay, squeeze. Sure, like the urinary tract and the urinary bladder, we can control the releasing of it, right? But it will contract. So you get the urge to urinate, but then there are other muscles that we can control and either stop that from happening or letting it go, right? So, and same with the digestive system, right? The stomach's going to squeeze and the intestines are going to squeeze food along, right? As it contracts. But then in the end, we do have controls, different types of muscles that control whether we actually release it. Okay, thank goodness for those, what we call sphincters. All right, then the cardiac muscle makes up the heart. So the heart is all specialized muscle cells called cardiac muscle. And we'll talk a little bit about it, not a lot. These are involuntary also, or this type of muscle is involuntary. Thank goodness that it beats on its own and contracts on its own, and we don't have to tell it continuously. Okay, and then the last type is skeletal muscle, which is attached to bones, attached to the skeleton. And this one is voluntary. So we do control some of our muscles, the skeletal muscles, and we will spend a lot of time on the skeletal muscle. All right, oops, here's some examples or, pictures of them. Okay, so take a look. This is what they look like. They're a little different. And I'm not going to ask you to identify the different type, but just know where each is found and, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. At this point, that's all you have to know. All let's finish up. Oh, actually, let's finish up with the last type of tissue, and then we're going to talk about something that is, several different types of tissues together. So nervous system. And we will spend a lot of time on the nervous system. So again, like the muscles, this is just an introduction and we will get there. So right now, two types of cells found in nervous tissue, and it's nerve cells called neurons. And these are the conducting cells. So there are cells that conduct electrical messages over distances. So, you touch a hot stove. Well, how do you know to pull your hand away? All right. Is it just the muscles right there that are going to contract? No, actually, it's your nervous system that has to take information to your brain and spinal cord, and then information comes back to the muscles, which cause contraction. And then you pull your hand away. So there has to be that ability to communicate between your brain and spinal cord and, different parts of your body. Okay, so we'll talk about that later. So those are the neurons. The other type of cell are neuroglia, or sometimes just called glial cells. These are support cells. Oops. They're not support neurons. They support the neurons. Okay, so they support the nerve cells. So neuroglial cells, or just called glial cells, or just something just called glia or glia. All right. And we'll talk about all the different types of neuroglia or neuroglial cells that we have in our body. All right. But they don't conduct electrical messages. They support the neurons and the nervous system. The last question here is dealing with membranes. So I've talked about one type of membrane, the basement membrane, but let's name kind of some basic membranes that are found in the body. Oops. So membranes are composed of an epithelial part to it and a connective tissue part. So it's not one type of tissue, it's a combination of them. So let's take a look at some main membranes in our body. And we have talked about a few, some of these already. All right, the first type is a mucous membrane. It tells you a little bit about it. It secretes mucus and it lines the passageways leading to the outside. So when there is an entrance into the body, internal part of the body, such as respiratory, digestive, urinary, reproductive, okay, they all have, passageways in, it's lined by mucous membrane. Okay, why? Does that make sense? It secretes mucus. Yeah, it's gross. And the cells that actually secrete the mucus are called goblet cells. But what does the mucus do? It traps foreign material. So it makes sense because anything open to the outside, things can come in through that passageway. And so you would want to prevent those foreign things from entering your body. And so that's what mucus does, is it traps things and prevents it from entering our body. So, right, you can feel the mucus already moving up into your, your mouth, back of your throat, right? You want to cough it up. And what do you do with it? You spit it out or you swallow it, right? And it's because it's got foreign stuff stuck in it. Cutaneous membrane is the skin. And for protection, we have the skin. And we'll talk a lot, a lot about that because we do have a lecture on the skin. So hold off on that. Then we have the synovial membrane. Now the synovial membrane, I think I did mention it. The synovial membrane is found within joints that move a lot. So the synovial membrane is a specialized membrane that secretes a fluid called synovial fluid. And that fluid is like a lubricant. So it's kind of viscous and slippery. And so in joints that move a lot, it's like the grease in moving parts in machinery, right? So it's the same thing. We have to have a means to reduce friction. And that's one thing, it makes it move smoothly and prevents friction, which produces heat and can cause problems in that way. All right. And then lastly, we have the serous membranes, which I have already mentioned: the pericardium around the heart, the pleura around the lungs, and the peritoneum around the organs in the abdominal pelvic cavity. So in, I think, chapter 1, I showed you a picture and I talked a little bit about that. Did I? Oh, I didn't show you a picture. Let me look for a picture really quickly. Hold on. I do want to find a picture. There's one, and I actually think I forgot to put it when I talk about. All right, let me find it for a second. Okay, so let me bring up some pictures. I realized I didn't put some pictures in there. I think I described it. But so the first one is the pericardium, which is, of course, is around the heart. And I did mention, I believe, about that relationship of the serous membranes around these structures, around these organs. It's like putting your fist into a balloon and you create different layers, right? So I'm going to do that again. Okay, so if we take our heart, let's say, but we can apply this to all the structures. So here's our heart, right? Here's vessels coming out the top, and we put it into a balloon. It's going to create kind of a double layer structure like this. This layer that adheres to the surface is a visceral layer. Viscera means like the organs, the guts. So it's sitting right on the organ. So we call it a visceral layer. And if it's in a heart, so if this is a heart, this would be a visceral pericardium. This other layer on the outside that sits in the cavity is called the parietal. layer. If this is the heart, this is the parietal pericardium. If this is a lung, it would be a parietal pleura and a visceral pleura. And then in between is the cavity. So this is the pericardial cavity, the pleural cavity, the peritoneal cavity. All right, so then we can extend that to the third type of serous membrane, which is the peritoneum. All right, but this relationship is very similar. Now, within this cavity, it contains the serous fluid. The serous fluid is also slippery, a good lubricant kind of thing. And that makes sense, I hope, because these are all structures that move a lot. So the heart, beats and moves. And so you have two layers, thin layers of membrane with viscous slippery fluid in between. So as it moves, it does this without creating heat and friction. All right, and that goes for the lungs too. As the lungs move, you have this relationship. Now the abdomen is a little more difficult. So do you understand this kind of relationship between the visceral layer, either the visceral pleura, the visceral pericardium, and the parietal layer, the parietal pericardium, the parietal pleura, the parietal peritoneum? Okay, so let me come back and share. All right, so that would be the pericardium. And hopefully we can see that double membrane. All right, let's bring up the pleura. The pleura is also pretty simple in that there's a, visceral and a parietal layer, and in between is the pleural cavity. All right. When we get to the lungs, we'll talk a little bit about that and that space there that it's important in breathing. All right, so there's the lungs and the pleura. Now the peritoneum is a little different because there's a lot of organs in there. It's not a single organ like the lung or the heart. All right, there's lots of different organs in there. And how do you maintain that orientation? So let's take a peek. Oops. Oh yeah, yeah. All right, so wow, look at that. Confusing. Okay, because there's multiple organs, here's a liver, here's a stomach, all right, here's a transverse colon. All right, but we see there is this kind of similar orientation. We have a parietal layer. Now the parietal layer lines the cavity, the abdominal pelvic cavity, but it turns inward and we have a liver here. So the parietal layer goes around and sits right on top of the organ. And then we have like a double membrane here. Oh, let me show you. This is hard to just look at even for me. All right, so let me draw it. It makes it a little easier to understand. All right, so let's say, here's our abdomen. Okay, like here's our diaphragm, which is kind of the division here. We have a liver here. We have a stomach over here. Okay, so we have multiple organs. So there is a parietal layer that's going to line the inside of the cavity. Okay, so just the cavity like this. But then we got to go around this liver. So now we're going to go around it like this. All right, but you can see in this area here, we have a double layered structure as we go around the liver. All right, but wait, we can't stop it here because it's not a single organ. Oh, there's a stomach over here. So we got to extend that peritoneum to then go around the stomach like this. Okay, but then again, we have this little double membrane of peritoneum before it goes. And then this is all visceral peritoneum, and this is parietal peritoneum. And all this space in between is peritoneal cavity. This is the cavity. All right, so the peritoneal cavity. So, you know, in medicine, there's a lot of things that happen in the peritoneal cavity. All right, you can imagine there's a lot of space there. There's a lot of things that they can do there. So, but for you to understand, where is that in the body? How does that relate to the organs, right? So there are specific names for these structures between organs. All right, so now let's go back to our pictures here. All right, see how that works. So here's the liver, okay, double membrane. Here's the stomach, and then this is kind of weird. It comes down and back up before going around another structure. So we have our double layer, boom, like this. So it goes around the stomach, comes like this, it comes down, and then it's going to turn and come back up. So in reality, there's this like quadruple layer of peritoneum that sits over your abdominal pelvic cavity. Okay, abdominal pelvic cavity. And it's like a skirt that comes down and hangs down, but it's all peritoneum like that. And then it goes around other organs. So there's something called the greater omentum, the lesser omentum here. This is called mesentery. All right, mesentery that kind of holds the intestines, but this is all peritoneum. Okay. All right. So when we get to these organs, like we get to the digestive system, we're going to see some of these things, the greater omentum and the mesentery. And so just kind of store this information till then. Okay, I hope that made sense. And next time we will do the integumentary system. Okay, thanks for watching.